Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to talk a little bit more about the animation of Monster Hunter 3, which I just love, if I haven't made that completely obvious. Alright, so this episode's going to be just like the last one. I'm going to skim through a bunch of the creatures in this game and just talk about what sort of things make them distinct in their animation. And by the way, if you're enjoying this and you want to kind of keep doing it yourself once this is done, I highly recommend it because there's all kinds of monsters in this game. Like there's swimming sea dragons and pufferfish and weird spongy ones and like bears and just tons, all kinds of stuff. And that's just this one iteration of Monster Hunter as well. Like you look at some of the other iterations of Monster Hunter and you'll find even more. There's just tons of them, and they almost all look great. And if you do decide to do that and look up some gameplay footage from other Let's Players who probably are playing the game way better than I am, like if you want to try to break down the animation of any one of these creatures, just, if it helps, focus on these two things. First, how is their movement influenced by their anatomy? Second, how do the needs of gameplay influence this creature's animation? Because as you'll find, that plays a big part too. Anyway, enough of that. I'm going to see how many more creatures I can squeeze into this episode. Okay, now here's a fun one, Brachydios. This guy is really distinct. In fact, to my knowledge, I don't think there's another monster in any of the games that move or function the same way this guy does, so he's pretty unique. Alright, so what makes him unique? First of all, well, in terms of gameplay, this guy's gimmick is explosive slime. Like you see how his arms and his horn are coated in that green stuff? That is a slime which he activates with saliva, as you can see him occasionally do mid-fight, which can explode on impact or given enough time. Like he leaves little puddles of it all over the battlefield that explode a few seconds later. He can coat you with it. Sometimes he can just trigger explosions right away when he wants to, which is also kind of obnoxious. And let's look at the way this guy's built too, because this is kind of interesting. Like at first glance, he's kind of got a Tyrannosaurus Rex build where he's just got those two hind legs that he uses for standing and walking and moving around. But his arms are really unique. Like they look like these big punching battering ram clubs. And that is exactly how he uses them. He mostly uses them for pounding attacks and punching the ground, but he does occasionally use them for movement. Like when he does this pivot sidestep move, which I really love because it's part of what helps him to move around the space so quickly. He plants one of those things on the ground, jumps and pivots his whole body around it to simultaneously jump and make a 90-degree turn. That move really helps this guy move around the space quicker. And he is pretty darn fast considering his strength, which is part of what makes this guy such a challenge to fight. You remember last episode when I talked about how a lot of the creatures have an enraged mode? Like I said then, a lot of the enraged mode forms come with a physical change that makes the creature look somewhat different, or usually, in the best cases, helps to kind of amplify the thing that makes them distinct or unique. And this guy's a really good case for that. When this guy gets mad, he lets out a big roar, and look at all this bright yellow-green coloration that flares up on his body. And the green that's already there gets even brighter and more yellow. I really like how the animators incorporated Brachy's front club fist things into his movement and the way he gets around. Like, he doesn't do it very often, but having him use it for those pivot moves, or for just, like, stomping across the playfield, I don't know, it really feels natural. Like, a creature built like this probably would use those big fist-like things for movement occasionally. That's part of what makes the animation in these games so successful. These are all made-up creatures, but the animators manage to pull enough from reality and the real animals we do have in nature to make these guys still feel believable and kind of make physical sense. Alright, so let's look at some of this guy's attacks. First off, he's got a pretty basic pounding attack with his fist, and you can see it coming because he raises himself way up, he pulls that fist he's about to punch with back, kind of like we would for a really big punch, and then slams it down with a lot of impact. Now here's another variant that's way more dangerous. He takes a few steps back and licks his fists while he does it, for a really big pounce. And you may notice that some of these anticipations are pretty short considering the damage they do. Again, that's a tool that the Monster Hunter developers have for increasing the difficulty later in the game. More damaging attacks, shorter anticipations for those attacks so that there's less of a tell, or so that you at least have to be sharp to see the tell and see the attack coming. But this guy gets really dangerous when he's enraged. Not only does he move faster and do more damage, but he gains a couple of instant explosion abilities. So check this one out. He reels back, raises both fists, and then pounds the ground and slams his horn into the ground. And then a second later causes a big area of effect explosion. It happens pretty quickly, but as a player, as soon as you see that horn go into the ground, you know to get out of the way. He's got another variant of this when he's enraged too, though. He raises up, not quite as far as he does for the big AoE attack, slams his horn into the ground with so much force that the rest of his body lifts up into the air, plants his feet and jerks the horn forward and out of the ground to trigger a chain explosion in front of him. It looks similar to the area of effect attack, but not identical, and as a player you'll eventually be able to instinctively know the difference between these two and see them coming. Alright, moving on, let's talk about another mid to late game creature, Nargacuga. Now this one's another relatively small monster, and at first glance it might seem like it's basically a clone of Barioth. It's got a very similar anatomy and build, pretty similar posture as well. In fact, I'm willing to bet that there are some animations that are shared between these two creatures. Like maybe some really basic ones, like their 90-degree turns and stuff like that. Given the animation workload on this game, I'm willing to bet the animators probably cut a few corners here and there where they could so they could focus on the more important stuff. But even so, there are still some details that make Narga feel distinct. First of all, the model obviously looks a good bit different. It's got more of a bat-shaped face and head, a longer, thinner tail, and actually notice that tail. The tail doesn't move quite the same as Barioth's did. It kind of lashes around a bit more frenetically and violently, and you will quickly be given more reasons to fear that tail as you fight it. Another thing you'll quickly notice fighting Narga is that it is fast. It moves faster than Barioth, it jumps around faster than Barioth, and its attack's anticipations are a lot shorter. It may be small, but Nargacuga is a pretty scary opponent. And it becomes even more scary and distinct looking when it becomes enraged, because that's when it really stands out. The end of the tail grows a whole bunch of spikes, some reddish coloration appears on its head, and its eyes glow really brightly and leave little tracer points everywhere it goes, which just looks really intimidating. This is a great example of the Monster Hunter animators using the Enraged Fury mode to really make this particular creature distinct and really set it apart from the other creatures that might be sharing its rig. But look at how fast some of these anticipations are. It really doesn't give you a lot of time to prepare and move out of the way, and it's made even more difficult to avoid by the fact that it jumps around so much. It will frequently jump around to somewhere out of view behind you, and then before you've even got the camera all the way turned around, it's pouncing at you with a swipe. This creature's got a bit of a learning curve. Oh, and look at how when it's enraged and it tries to swat you with its spiky tail, the tail gets stuck in the ground for a second, which hopefully gives you an opportunity to get at least one counterattack hit in. Man, this thing's fast. Alright, let's do another one. Next, let's talk about Zinogre. Zinogre's really cool. It's another one of those monsters that is smaller in size, but its build looks really powerful, and it is really powerful. It'll hurt you bad. It kind of looks like a steroided up wolf. So in terms of what makes this guy unique, well, its look and design really stands out on its own, but the other thing that really makes it memorable is the way it charges up with electricity. It'll start out the fight looking like this, which is already kind of intimidating, but frequently throughout the beginning of the battle, it'll stop to charge up with energy like this, and if it manages to do so 3 times without getting interrupted, then it goes Super Saiyan and just becomes way more dangerous in general. This is basically its enraged mode, except it basically stays in enraged mode for the remainder of the fight as far as I can tell. Actually, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's a way to break it out of it. The thing I really like about Zinogre is that its attacks are all really acrobatic feeling. When he does a projectile attack, he crouches back, some energy particles charge up kind of in front of him where the attack is about to go, just so you know to get out of the way. Then he jumps up, spins through the air, and lands flinging a projectile at you, which he does twice every time. I mean, that's really cool and distinct looking. And then he goes and does stuff like this. I don't even know what to call this. He takes a step back, and then... And look at that! He does like a breakdance spin flip and tries to land on you. That's awesome looking. And as you're probably noticing, this guy moves pretty quickly, and the anticipations for those moves are pretty short, which makes this guy a challenge. But even if those anticipations are really quick, he does still give tells. Like when he charges at you, before he dashes forward to pounce, he bends his legs and coils back to store up power for the initial lunge. Alright, so before I wrap this all up, I want to talk about one more monster, and this one's kind of special. So I think my favorite monster design in all of the Monster Hunter series is actually not in this iteration of Monster Hunter. It's in Monster Hunter 4U for the 3DS. And unfortunately, I don't have a 3DS capable of capturing video. Like, you have to get one specially modded to do it, and it usually costs in the range of $500, and I don't have any way of recording footage of that monster. Fortunately, some other really nice people on Twitter do. Specifically, Demonku. Thank you so much for helping me out with this. I am super glad I get to actually talk about this creature for you guys. But with that, let's talk about one more monster, probably my favorite in the whole series, Gore Magala. And hey, now you guys get to watch somebody who's actually good at the game. And apologies, by the way, for the resolution. Like I said, this is a 3DS game, so, you know. Okay, so every Monster Hunter game tends to have their flagship creature that they put on the box. Lagiacrus was the flagship monster for Monster Hunter 3, Gore Magala is the flagship monster for Monster Hunter 4. And the fun thing about these main mascot monsters is that they tend to get a lot of extra attention and effort put into them. And this thing is just packed with awesome detail. So right off, the best thing about this creature is its wing design. Look at the way these things move, look at their kind of loose flowiness. At all times, no matter what he's doing, Gore Magala's wings look like a cape. And it is so cool looking. Now, it might look like he's only got 4 limbs right now, just the front and back ones, but he's actually got 6. His other 2 limbs, which double as his wings, when he's not flapping or flying around, he keeps them tucked close into the body. And you can see the claw tips that gather up around his shoulders and actually kind of look like a cowl or the top of a cape. And they really milk this cape thing too. Like, on almost every one of his moves or attacks, they have him move his arms subtly or shift them just a little bit, just so they can get a cool little ripple going through those wings. And they get a lot more use out of those wings too, because they also have the option of having him flare the wings out every now and then to make him appear much bigger and more intimidating. Speaking of which, let's talk about his enraged mode. Like I've said earlier, the best enraged modes in this game come with physical changes that help to really accentuate key parts of the monster's design. And Gore Magala is probably the best example of that in the series. When this thing gets mad, it starts using all 6 of its arms, and that makes a big difference for its appearance. Suddenly it's got a much wider base, it looks much bigger and more powerful, its wings are all fanned out and shaking and moving more erratically, and to top it all off, he gets a bunch of pink accents all over his body and 2 really big pink horns on his head. Like, this monster looked great already, but it looks amazing when it goes into rage mode. Just for fun, let's talk about some of its attacks. Look at the way its head and neck, and really its whole body, makes this full snapping motion when it launches a projectile from its mouth. It almost makes it look like firing this projectile has a kick, kind of like a gun would, making it feel even more dangerous. And look at this tail swipe. Look at the antic where it rears back, starts spinning around in a circle, plants its feet, lashes the tail around. And then especially the way it resolves the motion by shaking its head and letting that shiver kind of go down the whole body through the wings, rippling them out, looking like a cape again. Look at how when you're seeing the projectile attack head-on, there's lots of side-to-side movement in the head, and when it fires, its wings flare out behind it like there was a big blast of wind from the shot. They use those wings to emphasize so much. And when it does an air projectile move, look at this coiled-up pose it hits here. That is so nice looking, and visually distinct from the anticipation move it makes before it charges at you from the air. Oh, and lastly, check out this big explosive attack it can do when it's enraged. It jumps back, plants itself, raises its head back, you see the particle effects around the mouth so you know what's coming. It's bracing itself with all of its legs on the ground, it lets loose the blast, and its entire body is blown back and its wings flare up from it. Oh man, I'm so glad I got to nerd out about this guy for you guys. Thank you again, Demon Kooth, for recording this footage for me. You're the best. And I think that'll about do it for me nerding out about Monster Hunter in general for a while. Thank you all for watching. I will be back again soon, probably with another Q&A video, since you guys have made it pretty evident that you'd like another one of those. And not long after, I will be back to talk about another game and another principle of animation. So I will see you folks then.